Here are a couple of general rules which may not apply all the time, but do seem to apply in this case. The first is that bipartisan legislation is the worst kind of legislation. If there's any idea, any proposal that can bring both Republicans and Democrats together and put them on the same page with each other, you know it must be uniquely terrible. The second rule is that when it comes to long-standing personal disputes between people, especially people who are close to each other, especially family members, if you know only one side of the story, then you don't know the story. Your opinion on the subject will be, therefore, basically worthless. Now, with that groundwork laid, let's begin with Republican Representative Nancy Mace, who, along with Democrat Charlie Crist and their bipartisan gang of legislators, are pushing a bill which they have dubbed the Free Britney Act. This obviously stems from the outcry over the conservatorship of Britney Spears, who was denied the right to make legal decisions for herself after the court determined that she's not mentally fit to do so. This decision was made over a decade ago, I think like 13 or 14 years ago, following a very public mental breakdown, actually a series of mental breakdowns by Britney Spears. And for the past many years, that decision has been repeatedly affirmed by the courts. The courts have said that Britney Spears is mentally unfit and potentially a danger to herself or others. But Britney's fans, and now the public at large, after seeing a New York Times documentary on the subject, have decided that the courts got it wrong. They have declared that Britney Spears should be freed from her conservatorship, which had granted decision-making powers to her father instead of herself. Britney herself now is also calling for the arrangement to be terminated. And now our lawmakers, never letting ill-informed hysteria go to waste, have jumped into the fray. Many Republicans have still not said a word in defense of the January 6th rioters who've been locked in prison for months on trespassing charges, even as BLM militants who burned buildings and assaulted police officers go free. And yet, those Republicans still have time to worry about Britney Spears. To that end, here is Nancy Mace making her case on Fox News. Here it is.
Thank you, Arthel, for having me on this afternoon. The Free Act, well, first of all, I want to thank Britney Spears. It took a lot of courage for her to come forward in a very public way as a celebrity and public figure, detailing the abuses of her conservatorship just last month in June. And her situation is a total nightmare. And if it can happen to her, of all people, then it can happen to anyone. And what this piece of legislation would do would allow someone like Britney, who's in a conservatorship, to petition a judge, petition the court for an independent or public guardian, someone that could oversee the conservatorship who doesn't have a conflict of interest, financial or otherwise. And that's really at the crux of this. And there are 1.3 million people in conservatorships across the country today.
Okay. So there are two basic questions to be dealt with here. One is whether this legislation is needed or warranted. And the other, more broadly, is whether Britney's fans and Instagram followers and people who saw the New York Times documentary are correct in their legal assessment of the case and their psychological assessment of Britney Spears. So we'll look into both of these questions, beginning with the first. Do we need this legislation? Well, Mace, and lots of people in the Free Britney movement have echoed this claim as well. Mace says that this is a larger problem. She says that conservatorship abuse is a widespread issue in this country. We got to do something about it. But she also says that 1.3 million people are under conservatorships. Well, in a country of some 330 million people, that means, if my math is right, and it usually isn't, that 0.3% of all Americans are under conservatorships? Not knowing anything about any of those cases, 0.3% seems like a rather reasonable figure at first glance. Is it possible that 0.3% of Americans are mentally unfit to make decisions for themselves? Yeah, clearly so. If anything, it seems that the number should be significantly higher than it is. I'm a little bit upset that it's not larger than that. A better question is it true that only 0.3% of Americans are unfit to make decisions for themselves? Only 0.3%? Now, Mace says that if it can happen to Britney, it can happen to anyone. But it doesn't happen to anyone. It doesn't happen to hardly anyone. It's happened to only 0.3% of the country. What do you mean it could happen to anyone? Yeah, but is it? Now, I'm not arguing that there's no need for conservatorship reform. What I'm arguing is that the facts about Britney Spears' case, what little we know, and the fact that 1.3 million people are subject to these arrangements don't themselves add up to a need for sweeping reform. If a better case can be made, then Mace should make it. If there is some real far-reaching, serious problem with the way conservatorships are handled in this country, then present the facts and make your argument. But then if that far-reaching, serious problem exists, why did you wait for Britney Spears to bring this up? Why are you basing this on the Britney Spears case? Why didn't you bring this up before? See, there are a lot of people who are today pretending to be experts on conservatorships. Oh, this is a major problem in this country. Yeah, it's a big problem. But you never mentioned a word about that until Britney Spears was in the news. Why is that? If it's a big problem, where was your conservatorship reform movement before this? As for the Spears case specifically, is it true that she's being oppressed and abused by her conservatorship? Is it true that the courts ought to free her? Before we can answer that, if we can answer it, we should establish one thing. It is certainly possible, in principle, for an adult to exhibit behavior which would lead to them losing the right to make decisions for themselves. Severely mentally ill people exist. Dangerous and suicidal people exist. That's why we have mental institutions. That's why we have conservatorships. The way some people are talking about this case, it's as though they object in principle to the very idea that any adult should be deprived of the right to make decisions. Like the way that they say, oh, she's an adult, she should make decisions. Well, yes, but what if she's crazy? Are you saying that no one should have their decision-making power taken from them at all? Well, if that's your argument, then you're arguing for the abolition of all mental asylums and psychiatric hospitals. You're arguing that any person, no matter how disturbed, no matter how erratic or self-destructive, should be permitted to continue making choices for themselves, even if those choices are almost guaranteed to lead to them harming themselves or other people or their own children. Now, you're free to make that argument, but it's an absurd and stupid argument and not one that any intelligent person should take seriously. Rational people can see that dangerously irrational people exist. And sometimes, on rare occasion, remember, we're only talking about 0.3% here, steps must be taken to bring them under control for their own safety and the safety of others. If we've established that, if we can agree that conservatorships exist for a reason and should continue to exist, then the only question is whether Britney Spears should be under one or not. In order to say no to that question, we would need to have evidence, compelling evidence, that she is mentally competent. Do we in the public have that evidence? No. What do we have? We have her Instagram page, where just this weekend she posted topless pictures. Now, that's not illegal. I'm not saying anyone who posts a topless picture should have their decision-making rights taken away from them. But is it a normal and rational thing to do when you're in the middle of a legal battle over your conservatorship? You're posting naked pictures online? Is that something that a normal, healthy-minded person does? But we have that. We have a documentary produced by the New York Times in which Spears fans and Spears advocates and lawyers unaffiliated with the case were interviewed. And we have Britney's own public statements. Okay, that's all the evidence we have to support the assertion that she is mentally competent. In other words, we have nothing. We have no evidence. Do we have evidence that Britney Spears should be under the conservatorship? Well, yeah, we do. We know that Spears had multiple psychotic meltdowns in public. I mean, we saw it happen, so that's how we know it happened. We know that Spears was not granted majority custody or even half custody of her children, which is a profound statement in and of itself. If you know anything about the way family court works, especially in California, for a woman to get like a 70-30 arrangement, where she might have lost custody completely, whichever it was, she did not have even majority custody. For that to happen, there's got to be something really wrong with that woman. We also know that every judge that's looked at the case and examined her psychological evaluation have found that she's mentally unfit. Does all of this mean that we in the peanut gallery can conclusively determine that Britney Spears should be under a conservatorship? No. We can't conclusively determine anything because we don't know her, and we don't know the case, and we don't have access to almost any of the relevant information. I keep hearing from people, oh, we grew up with Britney Spears. We know her. Oh, you didn't grow up with Britney Spears. You grew up watching some music videos of her. You did not grow up with her. You don't know her. But the facts, what little facts we have access to, would seem to be leaning pretty heavily against the Free Britney movement. A movement, again, spurred on by people who have made utterly baseless legal and psychological determinations. A bunch of fans with Free Britney signs have just decided that Britney is mentally fit. They have absolutely no evidence to support this claim, none at all. But let's say that Britney should be under conservatorship. Let's just say that. Let's say that she's mentally incompetent and a danger to herself or others. Would that automatically mean that nothing abusive is happening to her under the guise of this legal arrangement? No. She claims, for instance, that she is forced to use an IUD and not allowed to have any more children. That would be a horrible injustice. But then again, the key word here is claims. She claims that this is happening. The only evidence we have of this claim is the claim itself, which she made to a judge recently. Here's the full transcript of that moment. I'm going to read this to you. So when you hear this thing about the IUD, this is where people are getting it from. This is the only place they're getting it from. Here's the transcript where she mentions that to the judge. She says, "Team wants me to work and stay home instead of having longer vacations. They're used to me sort of doing a weekly routine for them, and I'm over it. I don't feel like I owe them anything at this point. They need to be reminded they actually work for me. I was supposed to be able to. I have a friend that I used to do AA meetings with. I did AA for 2 years. I did 3 meetings a week. I've met a bunch of women there. And I'm not able to see my friends that live 8 minutes away from me, which I find extremely strange. I feel like they're making me feel like I live in a rehab program. This is my home. I'd like for my boyfriend to be able to drive me in his car. And I want to meet with a therapist once a week, not twice. And I want him to come to my home because I actually do know that I do need a little therapy," laughing. "I would like to progressively move forward, and I would want to have a real deal. I want to be able to get married and have a baby. I was told right now in the conservatorship, I'm not able to get married or have a baby. I have an IUD inside of myself right now, so I don't get pregnant. I want to take the IUD out so I could start trying to have another baby. But this so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children, any more children. So basically, this conservatorship is doing way more harm than good." So she complains that she wants longer vacations. She wants to go to therapy once a week instead of 2. And she wants her boyfriend to be able to drive her. Then at the end, as an aside, she just throws in the claim about the IUD. Doesn't explain how this even works. Did they physically force the IUD into her? And what if she goes to the doctor to remove it? Will the doctor actually refuse to do it? Doesn't bother to explain. She doesn't seem to think that the IUD issue is as important as the fact that she isn't allowed to take longer vacations. Perhaps the claim is still true, but who knows? Well, someone knows. She knows, her dad knows. The judge might know. I don't know. Neither do you. In fact, you know almost nothing about any of this. And the same goes for me. That seems to be the overarching theme here. A bunch of people who know almost nothing and have no evidence of any kind and have access to none of the relevant information have nonetheless made sweeping determinations and are now calling for legal decisions to be made based on their assumptions. The whole thing is absurd and strange and embarrassing. And we have more important things to be worried about in this country. And for that reason, I must say that the Free Britney movement is today canceled. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.